The citadel of strategic unity was a monument to galactic ego. It soared from the surface of the moon Xylos Prime, a crystalline spire that fractured the light of the binary suns into a perpetual aurora of self-importance. Inside its hallowed, sterile halls, the best and brightest of the Galactic Compact came to learn the art of war, a subject most of their species had perfected millennia ago and now treated with the reverence of a dead religion. It was a place of immense history, immense power, and an even more immense sense of superiority. In Training Chamber Gamma 7, two of the Citadel's finest cadets waited. The air, recycled to a perfect median of temperature and atmospheric composition that pleased almost no one, hummed with the quiet thrum of anti-gravity plates and life support. On one side of the vast, white room stood Kthar of the Creche. He was magnificent, a warrior born. Standing 3 meters tall, his body was a fortress of overlapping chitinous plates, the color of obsidian and streaked with volcanic red. For powerful arms, 2 primary and 2 secondary, ended in razor-sharp talons which he was currently, and quite audibly, sharpening on a magnetic whetstone he'd brought from his quarters. The screeching sound was, to him, a form of meditation. To everyone else, it sounded like a dying droid. Kthar's species had evolved on a world of constant tectonic upheaval and brutal competition. They saw strength as the only quantifiable virtue. Everything else was just noise. On the other side of the room, floating a half-meter above the floor in a meditative lotus position, was Xylar of the Lorian. Where Kthar was a monument to physical power, Xylar was a testament to intellectual supremacy. The Lorians were a species that had long ago shed the brutish necessities of a physical form, retaining only slender, elegant bodies to house their enormous, incandescent craniums. Xylar's head was a smooth, pearlescent orb, crisscrossed with faint, pulsating bioluminescent lines that brightened and dimmed in time with his thoughts. He perceived the universe not as a physical space, but as a series of interlocking equations. Emotion was a rounding error. Combat was a matter of calculating probabilities and exploiting logical fallacies in an opponent's strategy. The sound of Kthar's sharpening was, to him, a distracting and mathematically inefficient variable. They were waiting for the third member of their specialized training cadre, the human. "The creature is late," Kthar rumbled, the sound vibrating through the floor plates. He paused his sharpening, tilting his massive, insectoid head. "It is a sign of poor discipline. On my world, the tardy are the first to be consumed by the magma worms." Xylar didn't open his eyes. A soft, melodious voice chimed not in the air, but directly inside Kthar's mind, a Lorian trait that was perpetually unsettling. Patience, warrior. The human operates on a chaotic biological timeline. Its endocrine system floods its neural pathways with irrational impulses. It likely became distracted by a reflective surface or a complex odor. This was the prevailing galactic opinion on humanity. They were a cosmic joke, a species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage by sheer, dumb luck. They came from a bizarre, high-gravity death world, as they called it, a fact they seemed bizarrely proud of, but it had clearly done them no favors. They were soft, squishy bipeds with no natural armor, no claws, no venom, no innate psionic abilities. Their technology was a hodgepodge of stolen and poorly understood concepts. Their greatest contribution to the galaxy thus far had been a series of bafflingly popular musical broadcasts and a fried potato snack that was both nutritionally void and inexplicably addictive. They were seen as fragile, emotional, and, above all, harmless. A species of talkers and tinkerers, not warriors or thinkers. Useful for filling out paperwork, perhaps, but certainly not for standing in a place like the Citadel. The door to the training chamber hissed open, and the subject of their discussion walked in. Jake entered with a gait that could only be described as an amble. He was a specimen of profound averageness. He stood at a height that was unremarkable by any standard, with hair the color of dried soil and eyes that were a simple, unthreatening brown. The standard-issue gray Citadel jumpsuit, designed to fit 1,000 different body types, seemed to fit his worse than most, bunching at the shoulders and sagging at the waist. He offered a small, apologetic smile. "Morning," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Sorry, I got turned around at the junction near the Arboretum. The signage is a bit confusing. Smells nice in there, though. Reminds me of pine. Thar let out a low chuffing sound, a fresh expression of utter contempt. Pine. The human was late for strategic combat training because he was contemplating flora. He resumed sharpening his talons with renewed vigor. Xyler finally opened his three, perfectly circular eyes, their silver surfaces contracting as they focused on Jake. He sent a gentle, probing thought towards the human, a simple scan to gauge his mental state. What he received back was not the ordered, logical flow of a Lorian mind or the simple, direct aggression of a creche, but a bewildering, roaring torrent of noise. It was a jumble of a catchy musical tune, a lingering worry about whether he had left his room's nutrient dispenser on, a detailed mental image of a food item called a taco, and a sudden, intense spike of affection for a small, four-legged creature from his homeworld called a golden retriever. It was like trying to analyze the structure of a star by listening to a hurricane. Xyler withdrew his probe, feeling the mental equivalent of a headache. Utter chaos. Their instructor chose that moment to manifest. Grand Proctor Valerius of the Cygnian Ascendancy did not walk through doors. He simply was. One moment, the center of the room was empty. The next, he stood there. He was a being of immense age and dignity, tall and robed in white. His face a serene mask of ancient wisdom. His people had guided the Galactic Compact for eons, and they viewed the grand sweep of history with a detachment bordering on boredom. Cadets, Valerius's voice was a calm, resonant hum. Today, we address a fundamental principle of asymmetrical warfare, improvisation. In the theater of conflict, you will be separated from your tools. Your blade will break, your rifle will jam, your mind will be cut off from the network. The superior warrior is not the one with the superior weapon, but the one who can make a weapon from their surroundings. The universe is your armory. He gestured, and the featureless white room shimmered. The whetstone vanished from Kthar's grasp. The faint glow around Xyler's head dimmed as a localized dampening field suppressed his psionic abilities. Even Jake's pockets suddenly felt lighter. Your environment is now sterile, Valerius continued, his tone unchanging. You have nothing but your intellect, your body, and your will. Your task is to create a weapon from what I am about to provide you. With another gesture, three identical objects materialized out of the air and floated down before each cadet. It was a single sheet of thin, flexible flimsiplast, the standard material used for bureaucratic forms across the galaxy. It was smooth, off-white, and utterly benign. Embedded in the corner of each sheet, in glowing universal script, was a single instruction. Objective: improvise a weapon. Present your solution for evaluation. Kthar stared at the flimsy sheet hovering before him. He looked at his massive, four-clawed hands. He looked back at the sheet. He then let out a guttural laugh, a sound like an avalanche. Proctor, this is an insult to my lineage. My weapon is my body. My claws are the legacy of 1,000 generations of apex predators. My carapace can withstand plasma scoring. To prove his point, a training dummy materialized in front of him, a humanoid shape made of dense, ballistic gel. With a roar, Kthar lunged, his primary arms a blur. His talons, sharpened to a monomolecular edge, tore through the dummy, disemboweling it in a single, devastating strike. Chunks of gel splattered against the far wall. He turned back to Valerius, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. That is my solution. I need no other. Valerius remained impassive. An effective, if predictable, demonstration of your innate capabilities, Cadet Kthar. But you have failed the objective. You did not improvise a weapon. You simply used the one you were born with. You have shown me you can kill. You have not shown me you can think. Kthar's pride visibly deflated. He let out a frustrated hiss and stomped to the side of the room, crossing all four of his arms in a gesture of defiant sulking. The proctor turned his gaze to the Lorian. Cadet Xyler, your approach. Xyler had not moved. His slender fingers gently took the sheet of flimsiplast. He held it up to his multifaceted eyes, analyzing its structure. His internal voice filled the minds of the others. The objective is nuanced. A weapon is a tool that applies a force differential to create a state change. This can be kinetic, chemical, or psychological. This flimsiplast is a polymer composite, bonded with a low-level data-conductive medium. While kinetically useless, its chemical properties are interesting. If folded along a precise 74-degree recursive geometric pattern and then subjected to a specific percussive shock, the polymer bonds will destabilize, releasing a cloud of ionized particles. This cloud would be an effective irritant to most ocular and respiratory systems, serving as a distraction for a tactical retreat or a prelude to a more decisive attack. He had not moved a muscle, but in his mind, he had already weaponized the paper on a molecular level. Valerius nodded slowly. A fascinating and intellectually rigorous solution, Cadet Xyler. You have identified a hidden potential in the material. You have demonstrated intellect. You pass. Xyler gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his floating form, the very model of academic arrogance. Finally, the ancient Sigmian's gaze fell upon the human. And you, Cadet Jake, you have been stationary. It was true. While Kthar had been boasting and Xyler had been deconstructing chemistry, Jake had simply sat down on the floor, cross-legged. He picked up the piece of flimsiplast and stared at it, not with the analytical intensity of the Lorian, but with a kind of placid curiosity. He folded it in half. Then he unfolded it. He ran his thumbnail along the crease. He hummed a jaunty, off-key tune, a nonsensical melody that grated on the nerves of the other two cadets. He held the paper up, squinted at it, and then set it down again. To the others, he looked like a confused primate presented with a strange new fruit, unsure if it was for eating or for throwing. Kthar snorted. The primate is broken, Proctor. Its logic circuits have failed. It is processing, Xyler offered mentally, though his tone was laced with doubt. The chaotic nature of its thoughts suggests it is cycling through millions of useless possibilities. It is experiencing a state of analytical paralysis, a common flaw in primitive, emotionally driven intelligence. Jake seemed oblivious to their commentary. He picked up the paper again. He began to fold it, not with any apparent geometric precision, but with a slow, deliberate patience. He folded one edge over, creasing it firmly. Then he folded it again, and again. His movements were methodical, repetitive. He was turning the flat sheet into a long, thin rectangle. Then he began to roll it, starting from one corner, making the roll as tight as humanly possible. He licked his fingers, using his saliva to moisten the flimsiplast, helping it adhere to itself. He rolled and compressed, his brow furrowed in concentration. The jaunty humming stopped, replaced by the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing. The process was painfully slow. Minutes stretched by. Kthar grew visibly agitated, his talons scraping against the floor. Xyler began to calculate the statistical probability of the human spontaneously combusting from sheer incompetence. Even Proctor Valerius, a being who had witnessed the birth of stars, seemed to be exhibiting a flicker of what could almost be described as impatience. Finally, Jake stopped rolling. He now held a dense, tightly wound spike of flimsiplast, about the length of his hand. It looked like a child's toy, a pathetic, flimsy imitation of a dagger. But he wasn't finished. He brought the tip of the spike to his mouth and carefully moistened it. Then he leaned down and began to rub the wet tip against the floor. The floor of the training chamber, while appearing smooth, was actually a microtextured smart surface, designed for perfect traction. It was incredibly abrasive on a microscopic level. Back and forth, Jake rubbed the tip, his movements patient and precise. He was using the floor as a sharpening stone. The saliva acted as a binding agent, mixing with the abraded polymer dust to create a composite material. It hardened as it dried, turning the once flimsy tip into something dark, dense, and ceramic hard. He spent nearly 10 minutes on this final step, a silent, focused eternity. The other three watched, their condescension slowly curdling into a strange, uneasy confusion. This was not the random fumbling of a confused animal. This was methodical. It was deliberate. It was purposeful. At last, Jake stood up. He held the object in his hand. It was no longer a piece of paper. It was a tool. A crude, ugly, dark-tipped spike. A shiv. Cadet Jake, Valerius said, his voice holding a new note of curiosity. Your solution is rudimentary. What is its purpose? A letter opener. Jake offered a small, polite smile. It's a weapon. Indeed, the proctor hummed. Demonstrate its effectiveness. The standards are high. Cadet Kthar destroyed a gel target. Cadet Xyler proposed a method of incapacitating a squad. What can your paper stick do? As Valerius spoke, a new target materialized in the center of the room. It was not a gel dummy. It was a Series 7 combat drone. It floated silently, a meter-wide sphere of gleaming chrome steel alloy, its surface bristling with weapon emplacements. A single, glowing red optical sensor pulsed in its center. These drones were used to train cadets against armored opponents. Kthar's claws would scratch its paint. Xyler's chemical cloud would be instantly filtered by its atmospheric processors. It was, for all intents and purposes, a small tank. Kthar let out a derisive snort. The human will break his toy against the hull. Xyler's mental voice was clinical. Probability of the humans construct penetrating the drone's armor. 0.00001%. Probability of the human embarrassing his entire species. 998%. Jake ignored them. He looked at the drone, then at the paper spike in his hand. He took a single, deep breath, and then he moved. It was not the explosive lunge of the Kresh. It was not the calculated, elegant flow of a Lorian. It was the terrifyingly efficient motion of a creature that had spent its entire evolutionary history killing things that were bigger, stronger, and faster than it was. He didn't run at the drone. He flowed towards it. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground. He closed the 10-meter distance in less than 2 seconds. His body was a study in kinetic purpose, no wasted energy, no theatrical flourish. He didn't aim for the armored hull. He didn't try to overpower the machine. He went for the eye. In the last instant, he twisted his body, putting the full force of his momentum behind his arm. He held the paper shiv not like a sword, but like an ice pick, a tool for punching through a hard surface. He jammed it forward, straight into the drone's glowing red optical sensor. There was a sickening crunching sound, the sound of hardened, weaponized paper piercing sophisticated optical hardware. The ceramic hard tip, backed by the dense, tightly wound body of the spike, didn't shatter. It penetrated. It drove deep into the drone's central processing unit, located directly behind the primary sensor. The drone let out a discordant electronic shriek. The red light flickered wildly, then went dark. Sparks erupted from the wound. The machine convulsed in midair, its anti-gravity engines failing, and it crashed to the floor with a deafening clang. It lay there, inert and smoking, with a crude piece of administrative paperwork sticking out of its face like a macabre birthday candle. Silence. Absolute, profound silence filled the training chamber. Kthar stood frozen, his mandibles hanging open. He had seen violence his entire life. He had seen worlds burn, but he had never seen anything like that. The sheer, brutal pragmatism of it. The casual, almost insulting efficiency. The human hadn't just destroyed the drone. He had violated it, using the most pathetic object imaginable to assassinate a war machine. Xyler was experiencing what his species called a logic cascade failure. His internal monologue, usually a serene stream of equations, was now a frantic scream of paradoxes. Fragile biped, chaotic mind, low-density muscle structure, improvised weapon from office supplies, target, armored combat drone. Result, catastrophic system failure. The variables did not compute. The equation did not balance. His entire understanding of the universe had just been divided by zero. Proctor Valerius was the first to speak. His voice, for the first time in perhaps 1,000 years, held a trace of something that sounded like astonishment. By the first stars. How? That was not an act of strength or of intellect. That was an act of malice. How did you even conceive of such a thing? Jake pulled his shiv from the drone's ruined sensor. The tip was slightly blunted, but it was otherwise intact. He looked at it, then back at the stunned aliens. He gave a slight shrug, a gesture of such profound understatement that it was more terrifying than any war cry. "Oh, this?" he said, his voice returning to its normal, pleasant tone. "It's a shiv, or a shank. Depends on where you're from. It's pretty basic, really. You learn how to make one when you don't have anything else. Learn where?" Valerius pressed, taking a step forward. "What citadel teaches the art of turning documents into daggers?" Jake chuckled. It was a soft, easy sound. "No citadel. You learn it in places where the only thing you have is time and a reason to be afraid of the guy in the bunk next to you. You learn it from stories. History. We humans, we have a lot of history. Most of it is just one group of us trying to figure out new and interesting ways to kill the other group. He paused, looking at their bewildered faces, and seemed to realize he needed to explain further. He sat back down on the floor, suddenly looking less like a warrior and more like a teacher about to explain a complex subject to a group of very slow children. "You guys are looking at this all wrong," he began, gesturing with the paper spike. "You, Thar," he said, pointing the shiv at the giant warrior, who flinched almost imperceptibly. "You were born a weapon. Your body is armor. Your hands are swords. You never had to try to be dangerous. It's just what you are. That's not a weakness, but it is a blind spot. You think in terms of overwhelming force. And you, Xyler," he said, turning to the floating Lorian. "You evolved beyond the physical. Your mind is the weapon. You see the universe as a puzzle to be solved. You think in terms of elegant solutions, of finding the perfect, logical key to fit the lock. You'd never think of just breaking the lock with a rock, because that's messy and inefficient. We humans," he said, tapping his own chest, "we got the leftovers. We're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. We don't have claws or venom or psionic powers. When we first climbed down from the trees on our home planet, literally everything was trying to eat us. Big cats with teeth like knives. Giant bears that could rip you in half. Snakes with poison that could stop your heart in a minute. Even the insects were deadly. We were soft. We were slow. We were prey." He held up the shiv. "So we had to learn to be clever. Not elegant clever like you, Xyler. We had to learn to be nasty clever. We learned that a sharp rock was better than a fist. A long, pointy stick was better than a sharp rock. We learned to use fire, to use poison from plants, to set traps. We had to weaponize our environment because we had nothing else. Our entire evolutionary history is one long, desperate scramble to turn not a weapon into a weapon. And we got very, very good at it." He leaned forward, his friendly demeanor becoming something more intense. "You live on worlds of rock and fire, Thar. You live in a world of pure thought, Xyler. Our planet, Earth, is a paradise that is actively trying to kill you at all times. The gravity is so strong it's constantly trying to crush you. The weather can freeze you solid or boil you alive. We have tiny, microscopic organisms that can invade your body and liquidate your organs. We have oceans full of creatures that are basically just teeth attached to a digestive tract. We have an entire continent, Australia, where it seems evolution just decided to see how many ways it could invent death." The aliens stared, their minds struggling to process the sheer horror of what he was describing. "So we adapted," Jake continued, his voice now a low, conversational murmur. "We didn't just adapt to survive. We adapted to win. We developed something you guys don't seem to have, persistence. We used to hunt by just following an animal for days, not letting it rest until it collapsed from exhaustion. We call it persistence hunting. We apply it to everything. We will wear down a mountain to get the ore inside it. We will spend a century trying to solve a math problem. We will fold a piece of paper for 15 minutes to make a tool to kill a robot. We are pathologically stubborn, and we weaponized our weakness. Our greatest strength is that we look like this," he said, gesturing to his own soft, unremarkable body. "No one ever expects the harmless-looking monkey to be the one holding the sharp stick. You dismissed me. You thought I was confused, scared. You never once considered that I was being patient, that I was looking at that drone and thinking about the best way to kill it with a piece of paper." He stood up and walked over to the ruin machine, tapping the paper shiv still lodged in its head. "You see, you were given a test in a sterile room. For me, this isn't a sterile room. The floor is a whetstone. The paper is a raw material. My own saliva is a binding agent. You said the universe is an armory, Proctor. We humans have always known that. For us, it has to be. A chair isn't just for sitting, it's a bludgeon or a shield. A pen isn't just for writing, it's for stabbing. A piece of bureaucratic paperwork," he said, patting the drone, "isn't just a form. It's a potential knife." He turned to face them, his friendly smile back in place, and the effect was utterly chilling. "We have to think this way. It's how we survived. It's how we ended up here, in your fancy citadel, being taught the art of war by species who have forgotten what it's like to be truly, desperately afraid of the dark." The chamber was silent once more. Thar looked down at his own formidable claws, which suddenly felt clumsy and obvious. He was a sword, but the human was a poison, subtle, adaptable, and lethal in ways he couldn't even comprehend. He could fight an army, but he wouldn't even see the human coming. Zyler's mind was a maelstrom. His entire logical framework for threat assessment was shattered. He had classified humans as a Tier 1 non-threat species. He now realized that was a catastrophic error. Humans didn't belong on the scale. They were an outside context problem, a species whose primary survival trait was the ability to break the rules of the game. They weren't playing chess, they were lighting the board on fire. Proctor Valerius stood motionless for a long time, his ancient eyes fixed on Jake. He had trained warriors for millennia. He had seen races rise and fall. He thought he understood every facet of conflict, every possible strategy. But this was new. It was the philosophy of the desperate, honed to a razor's edge and wielded with the calm confidence of a master. It was terrifying. He raised a hand, and a datapad materialized in it. With slow, deliberate movements, he opened a file marked Species Threat Assessment. Humanity, the current classification read, Minor, Non-aggressive. Potential for logistical support roles. He deleted the entire entry. He paused, then typed a new one. Reevaluate Human Threat Classification. Code, Apex, Latent. Psychological Profile, Pathological Adaptability. Innate tendency to weaponize conceptual frameworks and mundane materials. Recommended engagement protocol. Do not, under any circumstances, underestimate. Do not, under any circumstances, leave them unattended with office supplies. He saved the file and looked up at Jake, who was now trying to wipe the drone's lubricant off his paper shiv. Jake looked up and gave a cheerful smile. So did I pass? I'm hoping to get to the commissary before they run out of the nutrient paste that tastes vaguely like a Terran barbecue. You have no idea how hard it is to get that smoky flavor right with synthesized protein molecules. The Grand Proctor of the Citadel of Strategic Unity, a being who had stared into the heart of black holes, simply stared at the small, soft human who had just explained the art of turning paperwork into a murder weapon and was now concerned about lunch. And for the first time in his very, very long life, he felt a genuine, primal shudder of fear. The galaxy was in so much more trouble than it knew.